Welcome to Mom and Mind, where we dive into all aspects of perinatal mental health and wellness related to pregnancy, birth, loss, postpartum, and new parenthood. It's so much more than postpartum depression. We raise the volume on all of these topics in the hopes that someday everyone will have the support and info that they deserve before they need it. Please note this podcast is not a replacement for treatment by a professional or professional training. Welcome to Mom and Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. In this episode, we're going to get into a really fascinating discussion about infant mental health, and more specifically, why it's important to be considering infant mental health and perinatal mental health at the same time. Sometimes when I go to conferences, we're very heavily focused on either the mom or primary caregiver or birthing person, with some mention and some nod to how the infant themselves is doing. Certainly that is part of what we're discussing. But also in some conferences that I've gone to that really focus on the child and development, mention of the parents or primary caregiver is sometimes left out of the child's mental health. But really, this is a whole system. The specialist we're talking with today, Meyleen Velasquez, is a psychotherapist specializing in infant and perinatal mental health. Her practice supports individuals identifying as women and clinicians working on practicing from an anti-oppressive framework. Some of the things we're touching on today is, well, what is infant mental health and why is it so important to be considering that and perinatal mental health at the same time? What I hear so often from new moms in my practice is that they are so worried that they are not doing good enough for their child, or they're messing up their child in some way because they're not attending to them all the time, or they're not stimulating themselves, or they're not stimulating their baby enough for their growth and development. I think this is one of the traps of modern parenthood, is that there's so many ideas about what we are supposed to be doing in order to enrich our children and how attentive we are supposed to be, that anytime we're not doing those things, it feels like failure or somehow that we're messing our children up. Oh, and also, spoiler alert, you are not messing up your kids by not attending to them all the time. I'm really excited for the parents out there to get some of this information, and also for all of us to be thinking about the family as a system as opposed to just the baby or just the caregiver. So let's welcome Meyleen. Welcome, Meyleen. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I'm super duper excited to talk about infant mental health and the intersection with perinatal mental health. And frankly, I think this should probably be its own podcast. There's so much to know, and I don't know a whole lot about infant mental health, although I'd love to. So I'm excited for you to share this with the listeners and give us some information on what even is infant mental health and why should we be thinking about this. So please start wherever you'd like.
Thank you. So I'll start with how I think about infant mental health. To me, infant mental health is the idea that infants and young children, they have an emotional world. They have emotional development, and they have emotional needs that need to be met. Mm-hmm. The organization 0 to 3, they define infant mental health as an understanding that infants and young children, particularly 0 to 5, need to experience, regulate, and express their emotions. They need to be able to build secure relationships with people that are close to them. And then they also need to be able to explore their environment and to learn. So it's kind of a 3-prong approach, kind of learning emotionally based relationships and the exploration that is needed when there's safety. Mm-hmm. So I think about the intersectionality of infant mental health and perinatal mental health in terms of it's a two-way street.
Right.
So when we think about an infant being able to regulate their emotions, we know that infants are not able to do that on their own. So we call that co-regulation. Infant needs a caregiver to be able to provide that calm and focused attention and that soothing, loving, gentle touch so that the infant can then internalize regulation.
Sure.
But that can only happen if we're providing a safe space for parents to be able to express their emotions, which also means that parents need to have a capacity to express their emotions, to build secure relationships, and to feel free and safe to explore their environment and to learn.
Sure.
So when a parent is experiencing a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder, and that need goes unmet, then it can become impossible to provide that experience of co-regulation for the infant.
Right. Because the parent is dealing with their own internal struggle, whatever that may be, and it might be harder to connect and bond with baby.
Absolutely.
Right. So, right. In part of my experience in the perinatal mental health world is that absolutely, like, we are considering the well-being of the child and the well-being of the parent. But there are some real specific things that in relation to infant mental health that, like, all the things that you just described as a therapist make a lot of sense to me and is kind of in my thinking. But in terms of a discipline, I don't know if that's the right word, in terms of like a study of infant mental health, there doesn't seem to be a lot of crossover into both worlds. Both in the perinatal mental health world is really focused on the parents, although we are considering absolutely what's going on for the child. And then vice versa. It sounds like in any kind of conferences I've been to that are focused on children, there's not a whole lot being brought in of what's going on for the parents that might be impacting the infant.
Absolutely. I think that that's definitely across the board in most fields. As professionals, we tend to be very niche based,
Right.
which means that if I study this and I specialize in this, then I only see the world through this lens. And there's some crossover, like you said, in perinatal mental health, there's awareness of the infant. And in my experience in infant mental health, there is the awareness of the parental reflective functioning, which is their capacity to kind of hold the baby in mind and to imagine what the baby might be feeling and experiencing and what the baby might need. And there's an understanding of maternal depression and how it can affect infant development. What I see sort of missing is that understanding that parents are their own being, separate from the infant. With their own set of needs, emotions, desires that need to be met, aside from the relationship or that infant need.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. You're right. It seems so simple and straightforward when you put it that way. But to your other point, in terms of a discipline and what we learn, there's not as much crossover as there could be. What, as parents and potentially providers too, could we be noticing about babies that would tune us into how they're doing?
I think that the first thing as kind of providers and advocates in the field, the first thing to keep in mind is that every bit of information that we share needs to be shared in a space of compassion, of kindness, of gentleness, of understanding that when parents are experiencing parenthood as a whole, or especially when there is anxiety or depression intermixed, it can come with a lot of feelings of guilt and shame and a constant worry of, am I doing the right thing? Am I hurting my child? Is this safe? Is this okay? Am I being good enough? And so that's important to hold in mind. So with that said, I think that some of the things to kind of keep in mind is that first and foremost, if a parent is struggling, that parent needs support.
Yes.
Above anything else. In my training in infant mental health and in play therapy, gathered a lot of information as to best practices for young children, for infants, for the dyadic relationship, but not enough attention for what does this parent need? And how can we support this parent in transitioning to the role of parenthood? Whether that parent has their first child or whether this is their sixth child, because every experience is different. And when we don't hold that in mind, aside from the relationship, then parents can get lost. And the attachment relationship, the bonding, it's interrelated. Meaning that both the baby and the parent are very sensitive to each other. It is very difficult for a parent to provide that calm and focused attention when they're caring for a colicky infant. Crying for 3 hours, it's hard enough. Right. So some of the things I would imagine to look for is first, what I said in terms of making sure that parents are doing everything possible to care for themselves. And then two, noticing, whether there is support needed, right? So I like to focus first on kind of what are the basic needs and then how do we meet the emotional needs after that. So the basic needs is that parents can't be too shy or too tough on themselves when it comes to asking for support.
Yeah.
Because an infant thrives in relationships. And I think that parents thrive also in safe relationships, where whether it is that time in the evening when the baby starts to become a little bit more harder to soothe, and there needs to be somebody coming in and supporting that, or whether it is something as simple as somebody coming in and just loading the dishwasher or loading the laundry. Because all those spaces are going to help to lower the stress that then the parent is going to bring into the dyadic relationship, to the parent and infant relationship. So if we think about those first 3 points in terms of experiencing emotions, building secure relationships, and exploring the environment, a concern would be an infant that's not showing a full range of emotions. This will be an infant that maybe never shows happiness or rarely shows happiness, or rarely shows fear or anxiety. The same thing for us. Healthily, we need to feel a full range of emotions.
Right.
Also, an infant that's maybe a little bit more easily withdrawn. But it's also important that as I'm saying these things, that we don't go into that space of over-interpreting behavior.
Yeah, thank you really a lot for bringing that in. I'm thinking about all like the anxious moms I meet with that already overly interpret based on fear. So it would be really easy to slip into that. Really,
So
really easy.
We want to look at, is this happening in every setting and with every caregiver? If it's not happening in every setting and with every caregiver, right, then my question would be relationship-wise. What are both the baby and the parent bringing into the relationship? Is there a lot of stress that the parent is experiencing that then is affecting the quality of the relationship? And so when I talk about the quality of the relationship, I mean, it's their joy, it's their pleasure within the parent and the infant. And obviously there's going to be times that there's no joy and no pleasure, because it's very hard to feel joy when you're waking up for the 8th time in like a 2-hour span.
Right.
To like feed the baby or to soothe the baby. What you want to look for is, are there times that you're enjoying it more often than not?
Right. Right. So we're not looking for perfection at all. There's some normal variation. It doesn't need to be joy all the time.
Exactly. We're looking for what we call in infant mental health as good enough.
Yes, please say more about good enough.
So when I think about good enough, I think about a parent who responds to their baby's needs. Maybe their baby's cries or their baby's asking for interactions more times than not. And that can look anywhere from like, 60-40 to, 51-49. So just like maybe at some points, some days you're just showing up at 30%.
Right.
And so it's looking at the whole as opposed to, what happened in one day.
Right. Yes. Yes. That's great. Especially because I think for a parent, I mean, it might even be revolutionary for some people to hear that when we're thinking about your infant's mental health, that you getting enough support is part of that, because it's so hyper focused on just baby, making sure baby's okay and everything for the baby, that, people's ability to think about what they need really kind of drops to the side. But really what you're saying is that taking care of yourself and or getting support from people around you to feel better is also taking care of your child. And also, you don't have to be perfect to do that.
Absolutely. If you're able to take care of yourself, then you're able to provide a better, safer space for anyone else, including your infant. And I think that, that can look like a parent taking at least 30 minutes a day to take care of themselves, whatever it is that it means for them, whether it is going for a walk or whether it is taking 30 minutes to take a shower. Right. It is crucial that parents of children, especially young children, have that time, even if it's two parents kind of piggybacking off each other, giving each other 30 minutes here and there, it is absolutely necessary for the well-being of the infant. The more we can do that, the more that parents can then lower those stress levels in their nervous system, the levels of cortisol, so that then they're able to go into the stressful situation with a bit of a clearer mind and more tolerance for frustration.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of parents are really, really geared towards making sure they're doing everything they can for their child, which is great. And also, some of what you can do for your child is take 30 minutes. That's just, what you're saying is, I think, hard for a lot of parents to really absorb because we've also been told on some level that it's selfish to do that. Right? I mean, that seems like a prevailing myth.
Kat, I always tell parents and actually all my clients that a certain amount of selfishness is necessary for survival.
Yes.
If we're not prioritizing our well-being, then everything falls apart because the foundation of who we are is first us, and then everything else builds on that. Right? So if you as an individual are feeling strong or balanced, or, if you're feeling at that 51%, right, then that builds a stronger foundation for the couple relationship, if there is a couple relationship. And then on top of that, the parenthood relationship, right? But everything, it's like a 3-layer tier. It builds on each other. So it's reframing those old beliefs that you're going to be joyous and in love and, like blind madly by your infant all the time. And it's going to be a state of bliss 100% of the time. And that if it's not, then that means there's something wrong with you. It's really working to rewire those beliefs and to really noticing, what is it that I need to do for me? Because when we're truly doing things that are good for us, that improve our well-being, then we're in turn doing things that are going to improve our relationship with our babies and that are going to improve the quality of the social emotional development of young children, which is another way of, thinking about infant mental health.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So, I mean, the situations that you were describing earlier around if you're noticing a baby withdrawing a bit more or not showing the full range of emotions, what are other things that might be indicators that a baby is having a hard time or dealing with stress?
I think also a sudden change in behavior, a baby that all of a sudden becomes a lot more fussy than before. So another thing to look for is when there is regression in behavior that's not developmentally appropriate. And this is what's tricky with young children. The moment that you feel like you have things sort of figured out, they change. So I would say
that's normal.
It is. It's normal. It's the way it's supposed to happen because there's a crazy amount of development that's happening within the infant where it's born without a capacity to move their neck, right? And within a very short period of time, the infant is running. So there's this crazy amount of development that's happening. So that means that it's constantly changing, which makes it very, very difficult for parents to handle and to manage. So my personal motto is that when in doubt, when a concern is happening, find somebody that you can consult with. And this is also something that's extremely scary for many parents. The thought of, if I consult with this person, what's going to happen? What are they going to say? Are they going to see everything that I'm doing bad? Am I going to lose my child? Which is it's so hard. It's so hard because I imagine that for many parents, not only is it a fear, but maybe it's been stories that they've heard. Some of them, sort of myths, and some of them very reality-based, unfortunately. However, trained infant mental health professionals are professionals that are trained to support you in building and maintaining positive, safe, secure relationship with your little one. So there's an understanding that when you seek support by somebody who has the right training to support you, that they're going to be able to give you the tools necessary to support that relationship and to maintain that safety and security with your infant. Sometimes I hear parents might go to, for example, to their pediatrician. And even though the pediatrician is absolutely the place to go for many things, such as nutrition or changes in behavior or anything like that, not all pediatricians are necessarily trained in the emotional aspects of infant mental health.
Sure.
So seeking a therapist that has that training, seeking a developmental specialist that has that training, going to an organization like 0 to 3 and finding the parents' corner and kind of searching within there to look for what to expect. Is everything going right? Or even to connect with a professional within your area, because we're not going to know everything. And when we're in the middle of a storm, it's hard to really assess what's actually happening, whether what I'm seeing is really what I'm seeing, or if I'm going into that space of overinterpretation.
Right.
Or on the other hand, if I'm going into a space of underinterpretation, which is why I strongly believe that parents and children cannot live in vacuums, because it doesn't work. Right.
Can you say a little bit more about underinterpretation and how that might feel and look?
I think underinterpretation might be something like you have a feeling or a sense that something is not right, or maybe people are saying, hey, I'm noticing this, but we're going into the space of like, no, there's nothing wrong. Everything's fine. It's just supposed to be hard.
Okay.
This is the way it's supposed to be.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. So just as you're talking through this, this is incredibly complex in terms of like you were describing, the social emotional stuff, because there's the connection between provider and child that's really important. And then there's also these other layers of messaging that you might be getting from other people around you. Like, oh, that's normal. One that I hear all the time, new moms are always tired. And so themselves thinking like, okay, I'm tired, but it's fine or whatever. Is that like an underinterpretation of stuff? I mean, maybe they are just tired, but maybe there's something else going on.
Right. I think it could be an underinterpretation of some stuff. Absolutely. Which is why it's important to consult with somebody that can give you the right support.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we're all struggling with something. We're all working on something.
Yeah.
And not everyone knows everything.
Right.
We wouldn't go, I don't know, to find a recipe for how to make bread to a mechanic shop.
Right.
But we so easily do that when it comes to our mental health, to parenting, to our well-being. We so easily go to places that are very good and useful places. We all need a mechanic at some point in our lives, but are not the right space for what we need at that moment.
Oof, that's real. Yeah, right. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people, parents in particular, are not even given information on infant mental health and finding specialists as a thing that they could do, or that there's help specifically to help them connect and build and maintain that relationship with their new baby.
Absolutely. Just like with perinatal mental health, that there's a lot of myths into, oh, this is normal, you're just supposed to feel this way, blah, blah, blah. The same thing happens in infant mental health, right? One of the most common misconceptions that I hear is that babies don't have infant mental health.
Oh, right.
Like, no, babies don't have that. Or, oh, they're too young to remember. It's so contrary to the research, right?
Right. I think this is, I mean, I heard this, it's kind of like an old school, like babies are just kind of there. They don't really have feelings until they're older, or they're not aware, or that this kind of older idea of what babies experience. Yeah, that is a big myth. What are some other myths that you've heard of in terms of what babies' experiences are?
I think something else, it's kind of along the ways of what you were saying, that babies only need to be dry, to be fed, and to be put to sleep, which is another one that I think drives many of the parents that I work with bananas, or can drive them bananas. When they've gone and they've changed the diaper, they've fed the baby, they've burped the baby just had a nap. And there's not an understanding that babies also need interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Positive, back and forth, reciprocal, loving interaction. And that gets lost, right? Along those lines, another myth is that you can spoil a baby by carrying a baby too much or having the baby, in the Latino culture, is having the baby in your arms.
Uh-huh.
Going from arm to arm is going to be harmful, which is a total myth. First of all, you can't spoil an infant.
Mm-hmm.
Only way that an infant can let you know that there's something wrong is through crying, and that something wrong, quote unquote, it's not always I'm wet or I'm hungry. Sometimes it's I need to be with you.
Mm-hmm.
I miss you.
Mm-hmm. Really, thank you for that. Yeah, I do hear that a lot in multiple different cultures too. There's this idea of spoiling. And I don't know that there's like a clear cutoff age for that, but that's a big myth.
I don't think that there's ever a clear cutoff stage for responding and validating to emotional needs.
Mm-hmm.
There is a big difference between, let's say a 3-month-old crying in the middle of the night and needing to be soothed because this is the only way that they can let you know there's something wrong. And that if we go back to this idea that infants are not able to regulate themselves, they need that co-regulation. So once the crying starts, it can be hard for that infant to put themselves to a soothing place. And, not only hard, but it can be impossible. But there's a difference between that and a 2-year-old screaming and kicking because they really want to play with your phone.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so you would respond to it different. You can still respond to that emotional need and say, I know you're so frustrated. You were really hoping to play with my phone.
Right.
But my phone's not for playing. You can play with something else. Right. So providing that option. So the cutoff age for emotional response never happens because even us as adults, we need that. It becomes so invalidating when someone says to us, oh, just, it'll be fine. Mm-hmm. It'll work itself out. I love that one. I wish it did.
Right. Like magic.
World peace.
Right. It'll happen someday. Oh, you're totally right. Right. That's such a good long view of it that does not stop. And we see it throughout adulthood as well, for sure.
Yeah. The beauty is that the more that we're able to help that infant to co-regulate, the more that then that child internalizes that feeling of soothing and calm. And the more that then they're able to do it for themselves as they continue to grow up and develop.
Right. So as you're talking through this, I'm thinking, from the perinatal mental health perspective of like the moms specifically that I see in my practice who are overloaded, overstimulated, baby's crying, and they just can't do it. Like they've had too much, they are overwhelmed, and they need a break. And then there are worries that if they're not attending to their kids all the time, that somehow they're doing harm. So this is where that like good enough percentage, like spectrum that you gave would fit in?
Yes.
Okay.
So what I would recommend in that moment, and this can be a little controversial, but what I would absolutely recommend for a parent is that if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you just can't do it, the baby's screaming, you're feeling absolutely stressed, step away. Mm-hmm. Go to another room. Give yourself, and I'm not talking about letting the baby cry it out for 30 minutes or an hour. Right. I'm talking about give yourself a few minutes, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Soothe, calm, and then go back in. But that's absolutely necessary because, again, we're going back to that foundation that you need to be okay and that it's hard for your nervous system to regulate when an infant is screaming in your ear. And that it's unrealistic to think that you're going to be able to calm and to soothe and relax in that moment of stress. So take a break. The baby's going to be fine. You're going to come back. You're going to repair. And the relationship is going to continue strengthening. Right. But in order for that to happen, there needs to be the recognition within yourself of this is too much and too hard. I wish it didn't feel like too much. I wish it didn't feel like too hard. But this is how it feels right now. And what do I need to do for myself? And each time you do that, You're making a sacrifice for the benefit of your child.
Mm-hmm.
Each time you recognize this is how I'm feeling and this is what I need to do for me, not only are you making that sacrifice for their benefit, but you're also helping them to internalize the idea that when they need a break, it's okay to take a break, which is ultimately what all parents want to do.
Right.
They want to be able to teach their kids boundaries, when to say no, when to push themselves on, and when to recognize that a little timeout, and not a punishing timeout, but a calming, soothing timeout is necessary.
Right. Oh, thank you for really, really bringing the depth to that, because so many parents who are really want to do the best for their child end up feeling mostly guilty about taking those breaks. But what I hear so clearly about what you're saying is that it's going to be really a lot harder to soothe your child if you yourself are in an agitated state.
Absolutely. It's going to be just about impossible.
Right. Because there is that connection, and energetic connection. And when we're agitated, people around us get agitated too. And not just babies, other people, other humans. Not saying I've experienced that ever, but it's
never.
It never. But right, that absolutely happens. So there's power actually in recognizing that, oh, this is too much for me right now. I'm going to go take, put my baby somewhere safe, go take a little time out, and then come back in a different headspace.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
That's okay. That's self-compassion. Self-compassion for yourself. And it's also kindness for your child.
Mm-hmm.
Because babies are extremely sensitive to their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Just like parents are extremely sensitive to their babies.
Right. This is a two-way street. The dyad you said earlier.
The dyad, yeah.
Uh-huh. And I wonder if, can I pause here for a second? I don't know if this would be like putting you on the spot, not you specifically, but sometimes like with like some of my perinatal clients, they'll talk a little bit about how their baby interacts differently with them than they do a caregiver who's not there all the time. And then they're worried about what that, like, it seems like I'll hear this often, like, oh, my partner gets home and the baby's super excited to see them, but when they're with me all day, they feel such and such and so and so. That like babies will have different relationships with different people for a number of reasons, but somehow that's not soothing enough.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that question would feel like we're going into a whole other topic or not.
No, I think I can speak to the fact that babies do look different in different relationships and different settings. And that when you're with your child day after day after day, there are going to be stressors that you're going to see and feel and experience.
Mm-hmm.
And when the other parent comes in, or when a grandparent comes in, right, that stress is not there because they haven't been taking care of the baby 24/7, day in, day out, are not, strung out on no sleep. Right. So that makes a difference. And it's hard to recognize that difference when you're there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, it's hard. You're like, oh no, like my baby hates me. And they're so excited to see this grandparent come in.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not the reality. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that the baby's genuinely excited to see someone else because that's how babies are.
Right. It's not specifically
that's how
a
their
rejection.
Brain is wired. Yeah.
Okay. Right. As I think a lot of people who are with their babies all day are confused by this. Like, why is this baby so excited to see this other person? And feel, especially if there's depression or anxiety in the primary caregiver, if it almost feels like rejection, or it feels like they're doing something wrong. But that's not what you're saying.
No, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
Not at all. Babies are wired, especially after a certain age, they're wired for that social interaction. And they're excited to see the other parent that they haven't seen, that they have an attachment and a bonding with. But that doesn't mean that they're not excited or that they wouldn't be distressed to separate from the primary caregiver.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's just how babies are wired. And when the stress is not there, it makes a difference in how we view the world. Right? I often hear from the mommies that I work with the frustration of when they've been at home all day with the baby and the baby is not soothing, it's not calming, or is constantly needing reinforcement and attention. And the dad comes and the baby's like, happy, smiley, and,
Right.
the dad or the other mom come in and they're bathing the baby and they're having all these fun, loving experiences.
Mhm.
And then that can make a parent really feel crappy and crummy.
Yeah, right.
Right? But I think it's important to recognize, how am I seeing this? And am I telling myself the full picture of what's actually happening?
Mhm.
Is the baby really truly preferring this parent? Or is this parent like absolutely 100% more competent than I am? Or what is really happening is that this parent hasn't been there 24/7,
Right.
all day, at each moment,
Yep.
watching this baby in the good moments and in the really, really stressful ones with, no time to like go to the toilet,
Right.
right? It makes a difference, right? They're
Mhm.
coming fresh.
Mhm. Right. Well, thank you for bringing in that perspective. I know that there are so many people who are worried about that and who, to use, I think, your words, that to either over or underinterpret the communication from their child, that it means it has a meaning that it might not have. Yeah. So like our own level of stress sometimes will dictate how we interpret that then.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And
Right.
that we need to stop ourselves as humans and really analyze, when I'm telling myself this thought, or, this belief system is coming through my mind, like, oh, I'm not good enough.
Uh-huh.
Am I telling myself the full picture of
Right.
what's happening?
Right. Right.
And especially when there's depression, but I think we all do this, especially parents.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens and you can interpret it in a really positive way, or you can interpret it in absolutely the worst, crummy way to interpret it. And you're going to run with that one.
Right.
It'll be like, oh, here's evidence that I'm a failure in life.
Oh,
There it is.
yeah. Yep. Oof.
And we need to constantly bring ourselves back.
Well, thank you so much for this information so far. I know there's so much more to know, but I think even opening up the topic for people to understand that it's more complex, which can bring its own stress, but there are some deeper things to think about here. And certainly, I think based on the things that you already told us, some people will find a lot of relief and some people might have some more questions. But in terms of wrapping up for today, are there any hopeful messages for parents and specifically related to infant mental health that you can share with us?
I would share that infants and young children are extremely resilient. That absolutely, just like for us adults, anything that happens is going to have an impact in how we feel,
Right.
and how we develop. But if parents are able to get the support they need, babies are able to bounce back.
Right.
And so none of this is a forever thing. As long as we're
Mhm.
good enough, as long as we're noticing, do I need to get support? Babies are able to bounce back. The relationship is able to bounce back. And we're able to create babies that are healthy and that thrive in the world with relationships that we can enjoy.
Oh, that is so good. Thank you. Yeah.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us today. And I will absolutely send people to you if they want to learn more. And also, you mentioned the resource 0 to 3. Is that a good
Yes.
place for people to go to learn more about infant mental health?
Absolutely. It is the leading organization in infant mental health here in the United States. There's tons of information for both professionals and for parents.
Great. Thank you so much for that resource and for all of your wisdom today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, there is so much to know about infant mental health and perinatal mental health. So we're really just scratching the surface here. And also, we as parents can't know everything. But the pressure that we all feel is that we should know everything and we should be doing everything for our children that we can. And certainly, sure, when you know better, you do better. But let's take some pressure off of ourselves. We are all doing the best that we can with the information that we have. So if you really enjoyed this interview and you want to get connected with Meyleen, please go to hummingbirdcounseling.com or find her on Facebook at Hummingbird Counseling. If this is your first time joining us on the Mom and Mind podcast, please do subscribe and share with at least one person who you know could benefit from the information in this episode. You can find us wherever podcasts are played, or come join us on Facebook or Instagram at Mom and Mind. So glad you could be with us. Until next time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please share this podcast. Together we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Come connect with us at momandmind.com.